The Russian president has pledged to take countermeasures in response to what he calls NATO's eastward expansion. Vladimir Putin made the promise in an interview due to air later on Monday. Putin acknowledged that Russia's reaction to the latest developments in NATO has been, quote, emotional. The Russian leader, however, stressed that this type of reaction is justified as Moscow is concerned over NATO's recent decisions. The Western military alliance has announced that it will deploy 4 additional battalions in Eastern Europe and the Baltic nations, citing, quote, security threats from Russia. NATO defense ministers also decided in October to double the size of the alliance's response force to 40,000 troops. Moscow maintains that the planned military buildup is a provocation that does not bolster Europe's security. William Jones from the Executive Intelligence Review joins us from Leesburg. So you have these moves that are happening now, and of course you have the 3-year anniversary since Ukraine was pushed from what many call a coup that occurred in that country. Do you think that things are still somewhat up in the air, more so now since you have an outgoing administration and a new president-elect?
Well, obviously the situation is extremely dangerous for the next 2 months at any rate, because until we have a new president. President-elect Trump has indicated that he would want to have another policy towards Russia, that he would try to engage Russia again, as this president has actually not done in the last at least 4 years of his term in office. On the contrary, there's been an increased mobilization. There has been an increased attempt to bring countries that have been traditionally close to Russia or allied with Russia into a Western camp and going along with a greater deployment of troops right on the borders of Russia. And this is a long-term prospect that began even before President Putin was elected again, and is interpreted quite rightly in Russia as a containment policy, which they have to take countermeasures against. So I think the next 2 months are going to be very serious, and then we'll see if President Trump decides to have a new policy with Russia. Maybe we can bring down the tensions considerably during that period.
You know, when you talk about bringing down the tensions, I'm just curious if, and this is a if Trump and Putin get along and things are moving positively between the two, what will the U.S. then tell these Baltic states? You know what, we were exaggerating the threat from Russia, and now everything's going to be okay. I mean, what kind of explanation can the U.S. give? Because at this point, the buildup has been going on for so many months now, along with the military exercises, that, you know, threat of a war was like imminent, the way it was portrayed, at least by the U.S.'s accounts.
Well, I think the U.S. can well assuage some of the fears in the East European countries, including the Baltic countries, where I would say the paranoia is the greatest. You had an election, for instance, in Estonia just recently, where one of the parties that had traditionally been associated with Putin's United Russia Party is now in power. So you can foresee that there will be better relations between Estonia and Russia, or at least the basis for it politically. I don't think that Donald Trump is going to give up the Baltics, and I don't think they're threatened by Russia. I don't think Russia would risk nuclear war simply in order to overtake a Baltic nation. It's not in their interest. And that therefore, if the U.S. gives enough support and indicates that they will work together with the Baltic nations, I think, and create a situation in which the Russians no longer feel threatened by military deployments in the Baltic nations, I think we can create a situation of somewhat more moderation and well-being in Eastern Europe. And I hope that President Trump has the goal to do that. But of course, the jury is out still, because we don't know what his administration is going to look like. But the tones that have been coming from there indicate there'd be a better policy. The next 2 months are the worst. Wars can break out in a short period of time, and President Obama is in charge still, so we're not out of the danger zone yet.
And finally, quickly, I do have to ask you about Ukraine and the fact that it's the 3-year anniversary. Have they reached really any particular goals since what happened 3 years ago? Because as we see, Their integration with the European Union hasn't happened. Trade deals or any type of really improvement in their economy is still somewhat far off.
Well, there's not been much of an indication on the part of the Ukrainian government to try and resolve the situation that exists in the east of Ukraine. And there is a tremendous amount of corruption and a lot of blackballing going on. There have been a lot of very violent attacks against some of the legitimate parties, including Natalia Vitrenko, who at one point was a presidential candidate in Ukraine, who has been also very close to Russia. And they're starting to crack down. So it's like more and more of a police violence against opponents and a refusal to deal with the internal corruption, which is why the IMF and some of the international financial institutions have a difficult time in giving any relief to Ukraine until they deal with these internal problems. So the situation there has not improved to any extent, neither in terms of the military problems within the country itself, nor in terms of the rampant corruption, which has been a part of Ukraine going back a long time.
Thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. William Jones from the Executive Intelligence Review.